Okay, this is SampleManager 11, and I'm going to talk about the icon grid, which is a new control. So first of all, I'm going to Forms. I'm just going to create a new form. I'm going to give it a nice name, icon grid basic, and I'm not going to base it on anything. Oops, and then I'll just go into the designer for this. I'm waiting for that to create, and then what we'll do is we'll open the form. So I'll just search for that, and you can see I've done a few of these already, so I'll just modify this one in the designer. So the design is open, and on the left hand side on the toolbox you'll see towards the bottom under visualization there is a new control called icon grid. I'll just drop that on here. Now you'll see there's quite a few parameters on the right hand side, properties, such as the height of each cell, the width, the number of columns, number of rows. So we'll make a small 5 by 5 grid by setting the number of columns and a number of rows. And we'll leave it like that for the moment. Actually, we'll probably need to size it. What I'll do is I'll get it to size automatically to the right size for 5 rows and 5 columns. So I'll just choose fixed on that, and that'll be the right size. So if I save that and drop out, what I'm going to do after this is I'm just going to run it. It's not going to do very much because I haven't hooked it up to any data yet. So let's run this, and I'll just choose test, the default form task, and run it. And there you go, I've got a 5 by 5 grid. And that's just the basics of the icon grid. So you've got a matrix, a number of rows, a number of columns, and where they intersect you'll have icons representing or whatever it is you want to represent. So if we just hook that up to some data, and I'll do that quickly. I'll just modify this again in the designer. And what I'll do is I'll just plonk on a data source with icons in, and a data source with icons in might be something like the icon table. So I've got an icon query. I'll just put on the collection here for that to be stored in, and I'll point that to that query, and then I can point this at that query, and the data source we can say our new data source which we just made. There we go. So we'll drop out, and we're now going to show the first 25 icons because that's how much space we have. Obviously I could have put some sort of conditions in the data query, and we're not talking about any code here or anything clever yet. So let's just try that out. Test it. And you can see we've got our icons turning up. You can do things like drag and drop this stuff around. That's how it behaves by default. And we can talk more about the events around drag and drop in a second. On these you can also right click, and by default they'll get the menus associated with them. So you can see these things, and they're the default menu items for, in this case, icons. Obviously we could have pointed this at any data source, and so if you had samples you'd end up with an array of samples in here. So you can right click. If the Explorer is set up to refresh, then the cell will refresh again. Anyway, so if you remember, going back into here, oops, don't do that, in a designer there were quite a lot of properties on the right hand side, and some of these other forms on the screen help represent, help demonstrate those different properties. So first of all we've got all the things to do with the columns, the different labels, the background colors, general appearance information, then things like drag and drop controlled in the behavior section. So you can see here we've got adding context menus to how to drag, where to drag, whether the thing's enabled or not. And then right down the end we've got things like sizing modes and the data sources you can see here. And there's one on load order. If you drop this down, there's a whole bunch of ways where data, if it's loaded in from a query, a collection, how that would be loaded in. So in this case what we've got is everything from left to right, top to bottom, which is the most simplest, to, I don't know, right to left, bottom to top, has been the most odd. So if I come out of here, and I'll just show you some of these examples. Button. I did. Right, so first of all, we'll just test this one. We're not using any code, remember, it's just a default form task. So this is a quick demonstration of the different appearances we can mess around with on this grid. So the screen's a bit too small for this, but you can see what we've got is we've got background color, and we can see tooltips here. It's showing the tooltips as the location. We've got focus being shown. We've got just vertical lines. We've got just horizontal lines. We have no lines here. We don't have drag and drop enabled here, so we can't pick them up, whilst over here we can. We've got no context menu, so when we right click, you have to believe me about right clicking, it doesn't bring up anything. We've got the disabled option, so obviously you can't do anything to that. No tooltips, nothing when you hover over. Focus shown when you've got a background color. When you drag drop, it doesn't show it as an icon like it did before. And in this case, you can only drag and drop to a blank area, so I can't drop there, but I can drop there. So that's a nice simple one. Got some more of that. We'll test some of this. So the default form task again. Test that again. And a few of these you might have seen before, but you see if the cell's null, how do we represent that? In this case, we've got an icon showing an empty well, or we can use an image. In this case, it's a null is represented by the SampleManager logo. We can have custom column labels, we can have custom row labels, and we can have missing values in here. You can see that sort of. These ones you can't drag outside, so as soon as you try and drag something outside, it doesn't let you. Whilst with these other ones, you can move it between the actual grids. That's how they happen to be configured. And this one, again, no context menu, you've seen the rest before. Now, that's just the appearances. We also have the different labels. I'll just show a quick demo of that. Default form task. Dum-de-dum. So by default, they're all we talked about the custom ones. You can also get automatic numbering and lettering. So alphabet by numeric, alphabet by alphabet, numeric by numeric, numeric by alphabet. Roman numerals, we've got lowercase and uppercase, and we've got numbers and non-numbers. And you can obviously not have labels at the top and not at the bottom, or not on any dimension. And you get the idea. You can also tweak the different widths and heights of the rows and column headings. Now, ordering, these are to do with the loading. I'll just run one of these because it's relatively trivial. You'll get the idea. So before I was saying, if you link this to a collection of data, how does the data load into the grid? And you can see what we've got here is we've got left to right, top to bottom. So I come in at my left, I go across, go back, go across, go back. Left to right, bottom to top snake, I go across that way, then go down, and then go across, and then go down, and then go across, and so on and so forth. And there's 16 different ways by default. Plus, you can load them in yourself via code in any order you feel like. There's the other example there. Sizing is quite interesting. This is all about fitting to the available space. So in this case, what we'll do is I'll just test it, and you'll see what I mean. And there's 3 different ways of sizing things. So first of all, we've got a fixed size. A fixed size where it's actually anchored to the left. So anchoring means if I pull this right-hand side, it follows it. So you can see that one's anchored at the bottom. It's pulling out across. But if it's fixed size, it doesn't move. Interesting. The normal anchored bottom one, you can see the normal sizing actually puts white space around the edges of the spaces not used. And then you've got stretch, which changes the cell dimension to match the space, so it roughly stays in proportion to where it stays. You can see what's going on there. Next one we can do is a simple drag and drop. Again, there's no code here yet, so I'll just test this against the default form task. So if I come in here, what we're going to do is we'll see 2 grids, and we'll see an Explorer grid. So this one happens to be loading left to right, top to bottom. This one happens to be loading right to left, bottom to top, so from that corner up to that corner. So if I drag one of these entries off here, I can pop it in there. and it will drag across and it'll put this icon in there. And then I can move that to the other grid and it will move it across, and then I can move it back again. Now I can also select a bunch of things, pick them up, move them across, and then it will fill up from that side. If I happen to drop an entry there and then drop some more, it will obviously it'll realise there's only 5 spaces. I've dropped 6 items. If I say carry on, it'll put the 5 in it could, and obviously it won't overwrite the other ones. Now if I drop it on this one, what you'll notice is it goes the other way, because that's the ordering. This is all just a default implementation. If you don't like the way that drag and drop works, or you want to change it, we'll talk about it in a second. Right, so that's drag and drop, sizing and appearance, and the basic things. So let's do something a bit more complicated. So we'll just look at a little bit of code. We won't actually look at the code, look at some things we can do with code. So if I test this, I've got a icon task somewhere. This task here, I'll just run this one. And what we see is we've got a bunch of grids, and we'll just run through them one by one. So this top corner, we've got some colours tests, and what we can see is we've loaded this grid up with some colours. And you can move the colours around. You can see these actually represent colours, and when you select one, the focus value can be seen. So from code, you can see what's been focused, and you can actually change what's focused as well. So if I drop that down and do set focus, you can see just a quick test of the ability to move around and get where a particular thing is. Now on the icons overlays and text overlays, it's showing some of the power we've got now in 11 with the icons. So this first one here is just a normal icon, but what we can see in the top left hand side is a well icon, a blue well icon with an X character on top of it. Now that's represented with an X and an overlay. It's not it's one icon plus one text overlay together, and that's done from the code. You can also see what we've got here is a red bug, and underneath and on top of that is another icon overlay, which is a little tick. And then we've just got a textual overlay, which happens to be high. Now, this particular grid is being configured, so unlike this one where you can move from anywhere to anywhere and you can do swapping and stuff like that one, this one you can only move to an empty cell, and you can only move from an adjacent cell, a directly adjacent cell. So I can't do that with the Nepalese flag, but I can move that with high, and I can move that flag. So a bit like a sliding block puzzle. But all that is doing is calling some code, and the code's making a decision as to whether that move is valid or not. So you've got control over when you can drop things into whatever. Now on the right hand side, we've got entities which have been loaded in specific positions. They've not been loaded from left to right, they've just been put where they belong. And there are 3 different entities: a personnel record, a phrase, and a report. So in this case, what we do is you can right click on it, and we can see we've got the context menu for the operator. On this one, you can see we've got the context menu for the phrase, and on here we can see the context menu for the VGL report. Now if we click on somewhere else, you can see we've got a custom menu being added here, and I can do add icon. It's giving me some information because I've told it to, just to show the events being fired, and then it will allow me to browse and pick a new icon, and it'll put it in there. And when I right click, I can go on and do whatever I want to do with that particular context menu for that thing. So you can see from here we've got quite a lot of control over the menus and the positioning of entities when we actually build up the grid for the first time. At the bottom we've got a little drag grid. Now this has got a right click routine on it, so if I right click it, it's a double click. If I double click it, it changes its size, and also changes its column headings. This is just an example of redefining the grid at runtime from code. So if your grid is defined as in data, saying this is a 6x6 particular thing, then you can redefine this control on the screen to display whatever it's specified to look like. It's also a very chatty grid, this one. It's just showing the drag events that are happening. So I'll just drag this item, this top sample, from this Explorer grid to this data grid, and I've got it flashing a message on the screen with all the events that are happening. So first of all, it's the actual Explorer grid saying, do you want to remove the samples from the collection? And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say get rid of that one. And then it's firing an event on the grid itself, and it's going, some rows have been moved from the Explorer grid. Do you want them? Yes, please. And you can see it's removed it from there. And as I move it around, I'll also get events fired. And you'll see so you've got quite a lot of control going on. You can even see which keys are held down when you move the item around. So you can do different things if the shift key is held down, for example. So I move that across, drop it onto here, and then you can see it's obviously moved it into that grid. Now the Explorer grid is not particularly exciting. We'll show the columns in a second. We're updating the description as we move stuff around, but I haven't got that visible. What you can see on the right hand side is another grid, but what we've got is this is the null icon, so there's nothing in that cell, but I happen to have shown an empty well. So if I pick one of these up and drop it on here, what it does is it invokes an icon callback and actually, so there's my callback for the in the middle, and then it puts the icon, it puts the sample onto this into this well and makes the well blue and actually overlays it with the position number of the icon. So instead of using the actual icon on the entity, you can actually change the icon as you like. So if I drop a bunch of these on there, it'll fill up from left to right. And you can see what it's doing here is it happens to be choosing the colour that matches the status of the sample. Nothing too exciting. I think that's about it really. Yeah, that'll do for now. Cheers.